My name is Kayla Pierce. I am 28. I live in San Francisco and I do freelance graphic design. It is the kind of work where you learn to stay calm, even when everything around you is messy. That is probably why I did not react the way my family expected on Thanksgiving. The whole day had that familiar, sugary feeling my mom loves to put on, like a tablecloth. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I would love to know who is part of our community. The Manhattan penthouse always smelled like expensive candles and the kind of forced silence that only money can buy. John and Angela had spent years perfecting the architecture of their lives, and Christmas Eve was their premiere. I sat on a velvet chair that cost more than my first car, watching the snow blur the lights of the city outside. As an architect, I appreciate a good foundation, but I was starting to realize that the one under my feet was made of shifting sand. Angela stood up, her silk dress rustling, as she cleared her throat to command the room. She looked at Sydney and Kyle with a warmth she never quite spared for me. The Grand Mediterranean cruise is officially finalized, she announced, her eyes gleaming. 14 days through the most beautiful ports in Europe. We depart from Rome in the spring. I felt a spark of genuine excitement. I had spent my career designing modern spaces, but the classical lines of Rome were my true passion. I opened my mouth to say something, but John cut me off before I could even draw breath. We have discussed it, and we are keeping this one intimate, he said, adjusting his watch. Direct legacy line only. We want to focus on the core of this family's future. The laughter that followed was not a surprise, but it still felt like a physical impact. Sydney let out a sharp, melodic giggle, her eyes darting to mine just to see if the blow landed. Kyle leaned back, chuckling as he checked the cruise itinerary on his phone. They had already agreed on my place, and it was outside the circle. I sat there, my face a mask of professional calm, but inside, I was finally seeing the invisible chain that had held me here for 28 years. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. For as long as I could remember, I had been the family's useful burden. I was the one who stayed quiet, the one who worked the 80-hour weeks to build a career they could brag about, and the one who quietly covered the gaps they left behind. I had convinced myself that my compliance was a down payment on belonging. I thought if I was just indispensable enough, they would have to love me. It was a prison without bars, a psychological subscription I had been paying for with my own peace of mind. I had been the cushion that made their bad choices feel soft, the safety net that caught them every time they fell. And now, they were telling me the net was no longer needed for the flight. Angela leaned in, the sugary tone of her voice more toxic than usual. It's nothing personal, Kayla, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. We just need a vacation that is for family, without you. The room did not just feel cold, it felt clinical. I looked at my sister, Sydney, who was already discussing which designer boutiques she wanted to visit in Rome. I looked at my brother, Kyle, who was laughing about the unlimited drink package. They were comfortable without me. They had moved past the stage of awkwardness and into a state of total entitlement. I realized then that I was not a daughter or a sister to them. I was a resource. A line item on a balance sheet. I felt a sharp, clean clarity settle over me. This was not a breakdown, it was a realization. My compassion had been a luxury they had been overdrafting for years, and the account was officially empty. I designed structures to be permanent, but I was about to show them just how quickly a legacy can be dismantled when the silent investor pulls out. I stood up, gripped my coat, and walked out into the Manhattan winter, leaving their artificial warmth behind. The walk back to my apartment was blocks of frigid air and neon reflections, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a sharp, analytical edge that I usually reserve for structural integrity reports. When I finally closed my door, the silence of my own space felt like the first honest thing I had experienced all day. I did not throw my bag. I did not pace. I walked straight to my desk, the architectural model of a new skyscraper glowing under my desk lamp, and I flipped open my laptop. The clock in the corner of my screen read 11:51 p.m. I opened my banking portal. I did not even have to search for it. There it was, blinking like a warning light in the middle of a dark intersection. A pending wire transfer for $13,000. The recipient was the cruise line. The authorization had come from the joint account Angela helped me set up years ago, the one I had kept funded as a safety net for their constant emergencies. My mother had not even waited for me to get home. She had initiated the transfer while I was probably still standing on the sidewalk waiting for a cab. $13,000. It was not just a number. It was exactly the amount I had set aside for my own property tax and the final payment on my studio lease. It was the fruit of months of late nights and missed dinners. She had not asked. She had not even hinted. She had simply reached into my pocket and decided that my future was the appropriate currency to pay for a vacation I was not allowed to attend. I felt my pulse, but it was steady. My fingers were warm. I clicked the pending transaction and hit cancel. The screen refreshed. A small dialog box appeared, asking for a reason. I typed one word, unauthorized. Then I hit submit. I watched the status change from pending to cancelled in a split second. By 11:54 p.m., the $13,000 was back in the balance, but it was not going to stay there. I immediately initiated a transfer to my private business vault, an account they did not even know existed. I moved every single cent until the joint balance read exactly $0. Then I picked up my phone and called the bank's 24-hour fraud line. The representative sounded tired until I explained the situation. I did not sound like a victim. I sounded like a contractor giving a final notice. I want the joint account closed permanently, I said. I want a complete freeze on any outgoing requests and I want new accounts opened in my name only. She asked if I wanted to speak to the other account holder. No, I replied, my voice as flat as a marble slab. I have already spoken to her. She told me the vacation was for family. This is just me letting her pay for it. By 12:03 a.m., it was done. The new account numbers were generated. The joint access was severed. The digital paper trail was clean. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes, and I felt a heavy, satisfying sense of finality. For years, I had been the one keeping the roof over their heads, the one making sure the blueprints did not collapse. I was the silent partner in a firm that did not respect me. But the silent partner just liquidated the assets. I looked at the cancelled alert on my screen. It was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. And for the first time in my life, I did not owe them a single thing. I opened my digital ledger, the spreadsheets I had maintained for years with the same precision I used for my architectural blueprints. This was not revenge, it was accounting. I stared at the sum total at the bottom of the screen, $50,000. That was the cost of my membership in a family that had just revoked my invitation. Over the last 4 years, my compassion had been a financial resource they had overdraft without hesitation. There was the $12,000 for Sydney's boutique debt when her dream hit a reality check. There were the constant emergency transfers to Kyle to cover rent he had spent on bottle service and high-end watches. Every time, it was the same script, family helps family, Kayla. We will pay you back as soon as the next project lands. But the projects never landed, and the repayments never came. I had been the silent investor in their version of prestige, footing the bill while they performed an elite life they had not earned. While I was working 80-hour weeks in my studio, fueled by cold coffee and the pressure to meet client deadlines, they were sending me photos of their luxury dinners and coastal weekend trips. I was the one who kept the foundation from cracking while they polished the ornaments. I realized then that I had fallen into the trap of cruel normalization. My family had not been confused about boundaries, they just did not like mine. To Angela and John, my success was not my own, it was a communal asset they felt entitled to manage. They had normalized the idea that because I was the irresponsible one, my future could be sacrificed to soften the blow of their bad choices. They did not see a daughter or a sister when they looked at me, they saw a utility. This normalization was the sugary tablecloth Angela loved to throw over their rot. It was easier for them to believe I was too dramatic or oversensitive than to acknowledge they were using my mortgage down payment fund to pay for a Mediterranean cruise. In their minds, my labor was just another family inheritance they were entitled to harvest. I felt a cold, clinical clarity as I looked at the architectural model on my desk. I designed structures to be permanent, but any building with a fraudulent foundation eventually collapses. They thought I was the safety net, but I was actually the only thing holding the roof up. And now, I was walking away from the site. I rubbed my eyes, searching for a trace of regret, but there was only the clean, sharp data of the balance sheet. I was not just canceling a vacation, I was terminating a contract that had been one-sided from the start. The silence in my apartment was broken by the sharp, persistent vibration of my phone against the marble kitchen island. In my work, when a structure is under too much pressure, the first sign of failure is not a collapse, it is a hum, a low-frequency warning that the load-bearing elements are about to snap. My phone was that hum. I did not pick it up. I watched the screen light up with a rapid-fire sequence of notifications that looked like a digital heart rate monitor going into cardiac arrest. The group chat, once a gallery of cruise itineraries and luau packages, was now a combat zone. Sydney was the first to breach the perimeter. "Kayla, what the hell did you do? The hotel just sent a cancellation notice. My deposit is gone. Are you seriously doing this right now?" Kyle was seconds behind her, his message stripped of its usual bravado. "The drink package just got voided. I thought Mom handled this. Kayla, unlock the funds. This is not a joke." I sat there with my coffee, watching the typing bubbles appear and disappear like flickering lights in a failing circuit. They were not shocked by the fact that they had tried to steal $13,000 from me. They were shocked that I had stopped providing the subsidy for their cruelty. I viewed their messages through the same clinical lens I used for a flawed schematic. There was no architectural integrity in their outrage, it was entirely built on the assumption that my boundaries were optional. Then came Angela. The first voicemail was a masterclass in the sugary tablecloth technique. Her voice was thin, trembling with a manufactured fragility that used to make me drop everything to comfort her. "Kayla, honey, I think there's been a mistake at the bank. The transfer for the cruise final payment was declined. I am sure it is just a technical glitch. Please, call the bank and fix it. We are all so stressed out preparing for the trip, and we do not want any more drama." I deleted it without finishing. I did not need to hear the rest of the script. The mistake was that she had been caught. The glitch was my sudden refusal to be her ghostwriter. When I did not respond within 10 minutes, the tablecloth was yanked away to reveal the mercenary underneath. The next voicemail was louder, the pitch of her voice rising into a sharp, jagged edge. "Kayla, pick up this phone right now. You are humiliating me. I told everyone I was handling this. You have no right to gatekeep family money. Do you have any idea how much this cruise means to your father? If you do not unlock that account by morning, do not expect us to be there for you when you finally realize how alone you have made yourself." I listened to the words, family money, and felt a cold, satisfying click in my mind. She had overdrafted her maternal credit long ago, and now she was trying to claim my sweat and labor as her own equity. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I walked to the hallway where a framed family portrait from 5 years ago hung, a photo where everyone was smiling while I stood slightly behind them, blurred and useful. I took it off the wall. The frame had a small crack in the corner I had never noticed before. I did not feel a pang of nostalgia. I felt like I was clearing a site for a new, honest build. I dropped it into the trash can. The sound of the glass hitting the bottom was the most sincere conversation we had had in years. I opened my laptop and moved from the emotional wreckage of the group chat to the professional precision of my contact list. I found the number for Marcus. We had worked together on the structural contracts for the Midtown project. He was a high-stakes family law attorney who treated litigation like a chess match. I sent him a brief, transactional message at 12:45 a.m. "Marcus, I need to initiate a formal audit and recovery process for approximately $50,000 in documented loans. I also need a cease and desist drafted for a group of individuals attempting unauthorized access to my financial accounts. Are you available for a briefing at 8 a.m.? His response was immediate. I will clear my morning. Bring the ledger. I spent the next few hours preparing the blueprint for their downfall. I printed the transfer histories, the screenshots of their entitlement, and the digital receipts of every emergency I had funded over the last 4 years. My compassion had been a luxury they had treated as a right, but now I was the one performing the accounting. I did not cry. I did not ask why they did not love me enough to respect my labor. I simply adjusted the load-bearing walls of my life. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. By 3 a.m., I finally slept. It was not the sleep of a victim, it was the quiet rest of an architect who had just decided to demolish a condemned building. The air in Marcus's office was filtered, pressurized, and entirely devoid of the sugary scent of Angela's expensive candles. It felt like standing inside a clean room at a microchip plant, a place where the smallest speck of dust or emotion could contaminate the data. Marcus sat across from me, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the morning light, as he panned through the digital folders I had provided. He did not look like a man about to launch a legal assault, he looked like a forensic engineer examining a collapsed bridge, identifying exactly which bolt had been sheared off by the weight of too many lies. Behind him, the window provided a high-angle view of Midtown, the buildings standing like rigid bars of a massive, urban ledger. "Kayla, we have the audit results from the joint account," Marcus said, his voice as steady as a structural beam. "But while we were tracing the history of those emergency transfers, I took the liberty of pulling the access logs for your late grandmother's safe deposit box at the bank on East 72nd Street. I felt a slight tightening in my chest, a structural warning. That box was supposed to be untouched, a sealed capsule containing the only part of my legacy that had not been leveraged or liquidated. It contained a vintage emerald necklace, a piece my grandmother had smuggled out of Europe during the war. It was the only thing she had left me that was not a bank account or a piece of property. It was her history, and by extension, it was mine." Marcus slid a high-resolution printout across the desk. "This is the access signature from August 4th. He noted, his finger hovering over a jagged, hurried scrawl on the sign-in sheet. "Now, look at the master signature card you provided from 3 years ago." I leaned in, my architect's eye for detail immediately catching the inconsistency. The loops were too tight. The pressure on the downstrokes was inconsistent. It was a simulation of my handwriting, an amateur blueprint of my identity. This was not a mistake or a technical glitch. It was a forgery. I did not feel the heat of anger, I felt the absolute zero of total realization. Angela had not just tried to drain my checking account, she had breached the vault of my heritage. I left Marcus's office and drove to the bank in a state of hyper-focused clarity. The city around me felt like a model, something I could dismantle piece by piece if I chose. When I arrived at the vault, the environment was subterranean and sterile. The smell of cold metal and heavy oil hung in the air, the scent of secrets preserved in steel. I watched the teller insert the first key, and I inserted mine. The heavy click of the mechanism echoed through the small room like a gavel. I pulled the box from its slot and set it on the table. When I lifted the lid, the interior light hit the gray velvet lining. It was empty. The vintage emerald necklace, a piece valued at over $40,000, but priceless in its meaning, was gone. In its place was a small, white slip of paper. I picked it up, my fingers cold and steady. It was a redemption receipt from a high-end pawnbroker in the Diamond District. Date, October 14th. The name on the ticket was not mine. It was Kayla Pierce. The criminal twist did not just change the nature of the conflict, it ended the possibility of a peaceful resolution. My mother had not just been a safety net needing a loan. She was a predator who had pawned my grandmother's resilience to cover a cruise deposit. She had stolen the past to pay for a performance of the future. I stood in that cold vault, the empty velvet indent staring back at me like an open wound, and I felt the last lingering loop of the invisible chain snap. I took a photo of the pawn receipt and sent it to Marcus with a single, transactional instruction: include this in the criminal theft report. Do not offer a settlement. We are going for a total recovery of the necklace and a full prosecution of the forgery. I walked out of the bank and into the bright, freezing Manhattan afternoon. The sugary tablecloth had been burned away, leaving nothing but the hard, factual skeleton of a crime scene. I was not an invisible daughter anymore. I was a witness for the prosecution. I designed buildings to last for generations, but I was about to prove that a family built on theft is a structure that must be condemned and cleared for a new build. The doorbell rang at 6 p.m. on a Friday. I did not need to check the door camera to know who was standing there. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee that had gone cold, watching the shadow move under the door. When I finally opened it, the contrast was a perfect blueprint of a collapse. Angela looked unraveled. Her silk blouse was wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair was flat, and her eyes were a dull, desperate red. John stood behind her, his spine less rigid than it had been at Christmas, looking like a man who had finally realized his social credit was worth exactly $0. Kayla, please, we are losing everything, Angela began, her voice cracking in a way that was no longer sugary. It was just brittle. The cruise line is refusing to honor the deposits without the final $13,000. We have already paid $30,000 in non-refundable fees. If you do not unlock the funds tonight, that money is gone. We will be the laughingstock of the city. John stepped forward, attempting to summon a ghost of his former authority. Be reasonable, Kayla. This is your family's honor at stake. We were just borrowing it. We were going to settle the balance as soon as the house equity cleared. I looked at them and felt nothing but the clean, sharp edge of structural clarity. I did not see parents. I saw two individuals who had spent their lives performing a wealth that was subsidized by my silence and my labor. I did not feel the pull of the invisible chain anymore. I looked at Angela and saw the woman who had forged my signature to pawn a $40,000 emerald necklace. My mother's face was a study in structural fatigue, waiting for me to provide the cushion as I had done for a decade. I am not a bank, Mom, I said, my voice as flat as a marble slab. And I am certainly not a safety net for a crime. Angela flinched, the color draining from her face as she realized I had been to the vault. I did not wait for her to craft a new lie. I reached for a manila folder on the island and handed it to her. It was not a check for $13,000. It was a copy of the police report for the theft of the necklace and the forgery of the safe deposit box logs. I already paid the $50,000, I said. But I did not pay the cruise line. I paid the pawn shop in the Diamond District to retrieve my grandmother's history. I also gave the detective your name and the high-resolution scan of the signature log from August 4th. The $30,000 in cruise deposits is a sunk cost. You told me the vacation was for family without me. I am just making sure you have the full experience. You wanted a legacy that was pure. Now you have one that is documented. Angela began to sob, a loud, theatrical sound that echoed through the hallway, while John just stared at the police report like it was a demolition order. I did not ask them to leave. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped back and gripped the handle of the heavy oak door. I looked at the people who had viewed my compassion as a resource to be harvested until the soil was dead. There is no more equity to pull from this relationship, I said. I am closing the site. Then I slowly mirrored the action Angela had taken at Thanksgiving. I folded the conversation, said, "Goodbye," and clicked the lock into place. For the first time in 28 years, the only sound in my home was the steady, honest rhythm of my own breathing. The Grand Mediterranean cruise departed from Rome yesterday, but for the first time in my life, I was not the one watching from the shore while footing the bill. Instead, I woke up in a quiet cabin in Lake Tahoe, where the air is so cold it feels sharp in your lungs. Looking out at the sunrise spilling over the mountains, I realized I had finally reclaimed my worth. For years, I believed that if I was not holding my family together, I was failing. But standing there by the lake, it hit me that I was not the glue, I was the cushion. I was the one who made their bad choices feel softer, and the second I removed myself, they had to feel the full impact of their own behavior. The fallout back in Manhattan was swift and brutal. Without my $13,000, the non-refundable fees swallowed their pride, and the house equity John bragged about turned into a liability. This was the power illusion of the empty wallet. Their prestige was a mask rented with my labor. Once the money was gone, they had no internal character to keep them standing. I opened my old family spreadsheet one last time, staring at the $50,000 of legacy debt I had subsidized, and I hit delete. I blocked their numbers, choosing silence over their control. That night, I slept through until morning, finally honest within a foundation I designed for myself. If you have ever had to build your own seat at a table that was not yours, share this video. Your story deserves to be heard.